All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Way. I am the sports science lead and biomechanist for Athletics Canada. John LaFranco, the manager of coaching education with AC, is in the background if you have any questions. A couple housekeeping items before we begin. Everyone is muted, so if you do have questions, please address them in the questions dialog box on your screen. We will leave about 15 to 30 minutes to answer questions at the end, and we'll do our best to get all the questions as well. So, vous pouvez aussi demander des questions en français et on va traduire. My French is not very good, so hopefully everyone understood that. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the coming days on the AC YouTube channel. Finally, coaches who have entered the NCCP number and are NCCP certified will also receive a PD point for their participation in the webinar. So, thanks again for joining. Before we get started with Ollie, I just want to say a quick word maybe about the high performance webinar series. The topics we're covering over the next 3 weeks are shaped basically directly from the survey responses that we sent out. We had a survey go to the CAP coaches, and so thank you for that. The feedback has really helped kind of bring this together and where we're going with this series. So we're looking forward to that. Today's topic is one that's gotten a lot of attention lately, and quite simply, it's bicarb. So I'm sure most of you have heard or experimented with it, and somehow this kitchen cupboard ingredient has found its way back into the high performance sport world, especially with the launch of the Maurten's product. A lot of different ways people are using it, and a lot of noise around it, what it does, whether it's worth trying, etc. So to help us make sense of it all, we've got Ollie Armstrong today. When I asked him for a bio, he quite simply said that he's the physiologist at our hub in Victoria, and he specializes in training science and environmental physiology. I think that's kind of being extremely modest. So I'm going to give him one. He said he didn't want to sound like a Muppet. I think that's a British thing. So Ollie brings a great mix of applied experience and academic background. His education includes a BSc from University of Birmingham and an MSc from Loughborough University, accreditations in multiple sports science organizations, including CSEP and the high performance high performance specialist designation here in Canada. More importantly, though, he's been an integral part of our World Championship and Olympic teams recently, working directly and indirectly with some of Canada's best athletes. The goal today is really to keep things kind of practical, coach focused, and I'll try and guide Ollie through maybe a series of questions. He's going to help us break down exactly what it is and how it's useful. So, I'm a biomechanist by trade, not a physiologist. So, Ollie, I think the first question, if you want to give an overview of maybe what bicarb is and how it works in the body.
For sure. Thanks, Dana, and good evening to all those that are joining us. And yeah, bicarb is for sure a hot topic and something that is being discussed a lot, used a lot. And so we should look at what that actually is. It's a really great starting point. And to recap, so yes, bicarb, commonly known, short for sodium bicarbonate, and essentially is something that we're referring to in sports science and in sport around improving performance in high intensity exercise. And it's essentially increasing the body's ability to buffer the rising acidity in the blood. So really highly related to that term buffering. And it's actually something that's produced and is present in the muscles. And then we're actually as a supplement, we're adding more to the system. In particularly, we're going to dive into that around the hydrogen ions. But and the important thing for us to know is that it is legal, which is why it's a really big use product, and it has been shown to be a very effective ergogenic aid. So there are only a few that that you can count on one hand that have a lot of research behind them to show that they really do work, and bicarb is one of those. Um, so I'm going to share screen and just look a little bit into muscle buffering, and then that will help kick us off into a little bit more of what's actually going on. So just bear with me as I get this image up. So what's happening in the muscle here, particularly during anaerobic exercise, but what I will say is actually the key component here is actually the fact of the body using carbohydrate. And it's a bit of a dose response. The more carbohydrate that's being used, the higher that exercise intensity, or the more closely linked to anaerobic exercise that is. We get these two things that are produced that we really want to talk about. Lactate is one, and hydrogen ions are another. And so what we quite often do in physiology, particularly in that endurance space, but across a lot of different events, is measure lactate. But actually what we're really concerned with in this buffering component is actually the hydrogen ions. And the lactate is actually going to be used, and we can like push that around the system. And part of using bicarb is to help draw out the lactate from the muscle and then push that around the body through the bloodstream to be used and reused into energy. But a really important part is this hydrogen ion piece. So as we're in high anaerobic exercise, we get a lot of this hydrogen ion buildup, and that's actually creating a load of acidity within the muscle. So what we really want to do is transfer that acidity out of the muscle and then transport it around the body. And so what bicarb can do is what that does is it goes into our system, and by the time it gets processed and into the bloodstream, it's creating it's an alkali. So it's creating a differential between what's in the bloodstream, so an alkali environment, and then we have an acid environment within the muscle, and that creates this transfer. And so it's pulling out the hydrogen ions from the muscle and into the bloodstream. And so it's creating a less acidic environment in that muscle, as well as pulling out the lactate, helping speed up the lactate coming out of the muscle, and then that being transported around the body to be utilized into energy again. So it really helps by neutralizing essentially what's happening in the muscle site. And one of the primary reasons why we want to reduce that acidity down in the muscle is that as the acidity increases, it starts to impact on our cross bridge activity. So it really starts to impact on what activity we can do and essentially what muscle contractions that we can do. So the higher the acidity in the muscle, it's really going to impact on that ability to actually contract and produce force. So by moving the acidity away, we're improving and protecting what our muscles can do. So that's where bicarb comes in. That's why it's useful. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen there. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Why it's important. And it's really about those high intensity exercises. Typically in the research, we're talking about 30-second activity through to 10 minutes. Now that there may well be a conversation about longer duration activity, so longer duration events, and we'll come on to that. But yeah, it's really about neutralizing the pH and essentially reducing down the muscle fatigue. So that's what bicarb is doing in the body, and specifically related around buffering.
Okay. Yeah. So bicarb, again, not a physiologist, probably I'm more on the power side, but I know that there's things like beta alanine is a system or is a supplement that's also used in the endurance space. I don't think it's necessarily for the same buffering thing, but what is the difference? Because I think that's something that might be maybe more common, or
yeah. Thanks, Dan. That's a great question. And so, like, what we have going on there are two different supplements that are directly impacting buffering. They act in very different ways, but they have quite similar output. So, um, beta-alanine is actually happening in the cell, so intracellular, and is actually working around increasing the stores of carnosine, and it's actually that term increasing the stores. So it's actually a loading phase that's really required for beta alanine to work. So it's a long-term supplementation process, whereas bicarb is happening in the extracellular fluid. So it's not in the muscle cell, it's outside, and is an acute supplementation. So it's on the day, and we're talking within a couple of hour period of actually looking for a response into the activity, whereas the beta alanine component, we're talking about a loading phase that is a number of weeks, essentially like 8 to 10 weeks, and then we're going on to a maintenance phase, and we're having to take that every single day. Bicarb is something we can just take on the day, and is happening in a different part of the body, essentially, but they're both impacting on buffering, and essentially it's around being able to reduce down the acidity in that muscle site. They're both trying to do that, but through different pathways.
Okay. Would there be a time maybe that you would use one over the other, or are they?
Yeah, so quite typically the beta alanine would be essentially over like a smaller duration of time. So that would kind of be up towards the 5 minute block, but like whereas bicarb has like a wider window, there is an ability to use both. So you could co-ingest. But once again, that there's planning involved in using the beta alanine, because that has to be planned in advance to be able to get up to the levels where you need that loading phase for there to be actually the stores created over a long period of time. Whereas that bicarb can be dropped in on the day, and you can have this dual action. Research finds it very difficult to be able to prove how effective it is to have both. Just simply from a study design perspective, to be able to kind of have enough either people or the transit times of being able to be on one supplementation and then have a washout from that, and then be able to then use the other supplement, because the loading phase is so long in beta alanine. It means that the training status is going to be different. The time of year is going to be different, but when you're looking at a single athlete using the two. So yeah, scientific studies have really struggled to like ascertain out the impact of utilizing both at the same time. But essentially it comes down to utilizing one or the other has pros and cons. So we're going to dive in for sure
Oh,
around the
yeah.
pros and cons of bicarb. But beta alanine, you have to do it for longer, but probably has less side effect risk, shall we say?
I've heard about those side effects.
Oh, you have? Yeah. So, yeah, I'm sure that that's going to come up in our discussion here with the bicarb, but that would be a big reason as to why beta alanine might be used.
Okay. And in terms of other supplements, I mean, not in terms of buffering, but bicarb, is it something that can be used with if someone is using, say, creatine or caffeine or other supplementation that they're already doing? Is it a less risk for them, kind of?
Yeah, so it can be used with other supplements for sure. Yeah, we're going to come on to it, so we might as well start
Sure.
diving into some of the issues with it, which is or have been issues currently is around the GI discomfort
Okay.
with bicarb. And so as when looking at other supplements, it's really around its effectiveness or the body's ability to utilize the bicarb. The biggest piece is around GI distress. And so caffeine is something that can create some GI distress, and is quite typically not something that would be present within a bicarb protocol, simply due to bicarb can have a relatively large distress on the system. Layer that on with uh, like the situation and environment of racing, and then caffeine on top of that. It can be a lot for the stomach, and we'll kind of walk through that. But yeah, caffeine would be the probably the biggest supplement that we would err on caution around having, and where the timing of that happens. And maybe there are individual cases in which athletes and coaches are able to kind of tap into services to really like look at the individualized nature of that. And a different component is actually the delivery of the bicarb can really impact on that GI distress. And there are different products on the market that can explore some of those things. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So do you want to maybe dive into sort of why they have the GI and what that some of the things you can do to mitigate that then?
Yeah, for sure. So the big part of the GI distress is actually coming from, so the gastrointestinal distress is really coming from the fact that bicarb has got a lot of sodium in it. And so that injection of sodium into the system is pretty aggressive, and depending on the delivery method, is going directly into the stomach and then interacting with stomach acid, which becomes like very tricky for the stomach and the body to operate with. There are, I'm sure, many people on the call that have seen or heard many stories about where it has not gone so well, and potentially some stories from other sports that have had very little experiences of these stories, and some of that is related into like the activity. So in the sitting sports, the fact that the stomach is not having as much oscillations is probably a big impact as to like the reduction in GI distress. Whereas in our sport, we're typically seeing it in running, that running disciplines where bicarb is being used, and that there's a lot of oscillation with the stomach in that. But yeah, it fundamentally comes down to it's a big influx of sodium, and then how do we protect? So ways in which we can reduce some of that potential GI distress down is looking at dosage levels, is looking at timing of that, is looking at fluid intake, it's looking at amount of carbohydrate that is being also ingested around the time of the bicarb. And essentially then also the training of the gut. And as I mentioned, another component is which technique you look for / which product you look at. As I meant, like there are some products where it will be in a liquid form that goes directly into the stomach. There are other forms where there'll be pills or powders, and then there are others that are essentially this technology called hydrogel, which is creating a bit more of a barrier between the stomach and essentially as it gets into the intestine.
Okay. That sounds like Maurten's. Is that
Oh yes,
the
yes,
thing? Is that
yeah,
the thing? Yeah. That sounds like I'm sure even I know what Maurten's is, so I'm sure that's probably the winner in all of this. And I'm assuming it's not your typical Arm& Hammer baking soda that is just like in a fancy package. Is that fair to say?
yeah,
I've seen it enough times from people to taking it. So I feel like that's probably the one that people are most familiar with. They're probably taking. Hopefully, they're not just taking scoops of Arm& Hammer
yeah.
out of their fridge. But do you want to can you maybe go through some of the Maurten's stuff? See, I think that's probably where most people are going to be familiar with.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, just to recap on that Arm& Hammer situation. So that's quite typically through time that's what we've seen with sports science, and like obviously with athletes and trying things out, looking for those advantages, and essentially that is quite often where Arm& Hammer has come in is like ingesting that bicarb and essentially all that baking soda, and it's then a very aggressive way of having that sodium sitting in the stomach. And then quite often there's like a very dramatic reaction from the body to that, and essentially what we get is when there's a big lump of sodium all in one go, it becomes, the body wants to get rid of that, and so you might have that coming out one end, or you may have that sodium, the big dump of sodium. The sodium then has to be like essentially removed from the gut, and then it gets moved around, and then we have bowel issues. So it can go either way, and essentially the body is just trying to get rid of this really high dose of sodium. Now, what Maurten have developed, and it's part of their range of particularly around the carbohydrate products, is this hydrogel. And essentially the best way to think about the hydrogel is the technology has created this like honeycomb like matrix, which essentially is a protection and a housing, and then you can kind of put something within that housing that will like get it through the stomach and then into the intestine, where it can then be broken down. And so where Maurten has like initially put its product is that it's worked on is carbohydrates in that hydrogel, but now they've put bicarb in there. And so essentially what's happening is that hydrogel formula is being protected as it goes through the stomach, and it enters into the intestine, and then it gets broken down. And not only does it get protected against that stomach acid, which is the really big piece around the GI distress, but it's actually meaning that there's a higher quantity of what's ingested, that a higher quantity of the bicarb that's ingested is actually making it through to the system and actually being useful. Where some of the research has maybe looked at slightly higher dosage of bicarb, whereas Maurten you can go a little lower because more of it's actually getting to where we want it to be. We're not getting wastage with that. And so what I'll do is I'll throw up some more little images.
Perfect. I was told you had slides. So
Oh, I do, yeah. So let me just see. Here we go. Maurten. So there are obviously a few different options that we can go down. Sorry, I'm just looking for my slide deck here. No, apologies. I can't seem to find it on my share. Here we go. So the Maurten packages will come in a package like this, and it will come in a box with four different essentially you'll have 4 servings of it, and it comes with what they call their ABC. So the A is the cup on the left hand side, which a lot of people have seen lots of athletes using, and then the B is essentially what that is that hydrogel formula, and that's added to water. And then the C on the right hand side, that is actually the bicarb. Now, interestingly, not only do they have this hydrogel technology, call it technology, but it's a hydrogel, and with this structure that protects it, the bicarb is actually split up into really tiny pellets, and like the tiny pellets, essentially, that's also creating a protection of the bicarb not being in as higher quantities. It's being spread out over lots of different small pellets. So as I like just go through these, this is what Maurten have on their website, and so just walk through some of these. So what happens is that you're asked to you fill up the little cup, and you fill that up with water, and then you add this the B component, and then you shake it, vigorously for 15 seconds, and that's creating this hydrogel. You then leave it to stand for 3 to 5 minutes, and that's really creating that, as I was saying, those kind of like honeycomb structures, which are really, really important. And then what you end up doing there is you then tear out this the packet, the C packet, which is then all these little pellets, and then that lands. Essentially, you have to be very careful with mixing it in to the hydrogel. Trying not to disturb too many of those pellets or break them up. And then you need to ingest that as soon as possible. Now, those pellets just look like that in that image there. Now, what's quite interesting with Maurten is an additional fact that impacts on like the GI distress is not only have we got this protective like honeycomb that's protecting the bicarb and delivering it through the stomach, we're getting more of it through the system. So that's the two really great things. The other component where is different to a lot of the other products is that the hydrogel also has carbohydrate in it. So the carbohydrate helps protect, once again, the stomach. And so in reference to our Arm and Hammer, where we're just taking baking soda on, we've got built-in carbohydrate within there. And it'll be really good to walk through an example of what this might look like for an athlete. But one of the ways in which we can help mitigate some of those GI distress is building out a plan that has some regular ingestion of carbohydrate, just to help the stomach have less GI issues as that bicarb is passing through. So that's another reason where Maurten is a really good product and has like a really big has had a really big impact on like the levels of GI distress that have been experienced by athletes. And actually, I have a little graph, little bit of data here that was from a study published last year. And so you have the white bars are essentially bicarb that's taken in capsule form, and then you have Maurten bicarb in like the sort of like gray off tone color. And what you can see there is on all of these different markers of symptoms, GI symptoms, there's such a huge and dramatic decrease in the instances of GI issues when using the bicarb system from Maurten. And that's really down to those three different components: the hydrogel, being able to deliver it through the stomach, and the fact that is avoiding the stomach acid, as well as the fact that there's carbohydrate within that system. Whereas with even with like pills, what you're able to, then the capsules, you're able to put a protocol together, but the fact that Maurten has it built in makes it a really easy situation for athletes to be able to execute on race day. And just want to touch on the sodium component though, just while we're talking about Maurten, and just really make this like really apparent. And so we'll talk about training, but just referencing that Maurten has a really good system on their website where you can type in your body weight, whether you're an experienced user or you're a first-time user, and it will help guide you through which product of their bicarb system is most appropriate for you. And so a lot of it is down to your body weight and then looking at the dosage. So they have a 12, 15, 19, 22, and 25 system, and that's essentially the grams of sodium bicarbonate. Now, what you'll see on the right-hand side of all of those is an equals, and then milligrams, and that's of sodium. So essentially, in bicarb system 12, there's 3.3 grams of sodium, and in bicarb system 25, there's 6.8 grams, which is a lot of sodium, and that's will be relative to the body weight of somebody. But just to put it into perspective, the recommended daily intake in Canada, the upper limit of sodium is 2.3 grams. So it's a lot of sodium that's being delivered in a single shot of a supplement. And this is one of the reasons why, well, it's the main reason why it's so aggressive and there are so many GI distress issues. And so I just want to make that clear that using bicarb as a supplementation, it's been shown to have positive impacts on performance, but there are risks to it. There are risks to side effects. And so something that we would want to manage is how frequently there are those usages of bicarb, even with Maurten, because it is a big delivery of sodium in a single shot. So Maurten do suggest that you don't utilize it more than 2 to 3 doses a week, so that the body isn't in extreme stress through that system, and in constant use of it, which would lead us to the conversation around training. And essentially, let me just show you a dosage example here. So this is one way of looking at it, and this is something that we, myself, and the other practitioners at Athletics Canada in both physiology and nutrition have really worked on. And essentially, a lot of these things can be adjusted, and they're very individualized. So the response of bicarb is very individualized. One athlete may have a 1% improvement or impact on, whereas somebody else, it might be more of a 3 or a 4%. That's really individual based upon their own physiology and then their event and how much what their anaerobic component looks like in their activity, but in their event. But working through this, any protocol will look at breaking down essentially amount of carbohydrate, amount of fluid, and then per kilo, and then the actual bicarb component. So in this example here, in red, this is based on, say, a 60-kilogram athlete, and we can split these pieces up over 3 different time points heading into the race. So 2 hours before, 30 grams of carbohydrate plus 150 milliliters of fluid. Now that may be part of the pre-race meal. It might just be a snack. And then 90 minutes before race, we're looking at the introduction of bicarb, so the ingestion of that, the 30 grams of carbohydrate, which for Maurten, that's within the system. So Maurten takes care of that 30 grams, and then 150 milliliters of fluid. Now, the fluid's important because we've got so much sodium that's going into the system. And so that the fluid is allowing the body to actually deal with the fact that there's such an influx of sodium. And the body will retain that fluid as well. And that's important for some of our coaches, some of our athletes to consider, or just be aware of. Particularly on the rehydration on the other side, that we probably don't need a high sodium drink for our recovery or rehydration piece. We want to go for a lower sodium option with our electrolytes. And then 1 hour before race, once again, looking at that 30 grams of carbohydrate, 150 milliliters of fluid. And as I say, that's based on an athlete that's 60 kilograms. But that's how it can look. And those times and quantities can be adjusted and trialed with. And that's something that we'd really recommend around bicarb is to trial it in training, be able to connect with either myself or one of the nutritionists around how we can adjust any of those components that's going to essentially allow the athlete to excel. And I'll just flip back, Dana, here, just because I think it's really relevant, is the time course. So the graph right at the top, that's the traditional data that's been collected that's been based around capsules of bicarb. And essentially the peak realistically of bicarb being in the system in the blood is around the 90-minute mark, and then it stays pretty consistent for around 120 minutes, so 2 hours, and then it starts to drop. Whereas what we've seen with the new Maurten bicarb system is that it will hold for longer. And I think this is down to the delivery, going back to the delivery component where more of the bicarb is actually being delivered. So therefore we have these elevated levels within the blood. So the blood pH is altered for a longer period of time. And I think it is really due to the fact that more is being delivered into the system rather than being left in the stomach through like either a capsule situation or through a fluid ingestion.
Okay. So with the timing and the dosage, I think it's you kind of touched on it there with like sort of the newer system in terms of like holding it longer. That was going to be my kind of question was if the timelines, what happens if you don't take it at the right time, or what happens if a race is delayed? We've all seen it, or call rooms are longer. How does that impact either the
Yeah.
performance or the bathroom situation?
Yeah. So yeah, good question, and very practical, and essentially like as you saw from that second graph, where they looked at the time course with the Maurten product, is that it is over a longer period of time, like it's elevated for a longer period of time. So that is a really good option. And I don't work for Maurten. It's important for me to say that. But obviously, from a practical component, there are our coaches and athletes a product that's proven to have lower GI distress and shown to have performance improvements. It's a really great product. And so, yeah, there's that time course where it's longer. And so we've got more of a buffer time on time. It also means that we can, based on the athlete and what they're comfortable with doing and what they've trialed, is we can push those times out earlier. So further away from like race time, such as like meal times, like when we have the bicarb. So rather than it be 90 minutes before, we can have it 2 hours or 2.5 hours. We need to trial that. But we can play with that. And the other thing to consider here is that this supplement, if we are ingesting bicarb, although there might be a peak, there's also a piece that, if there are changes to our timeline with racing, the fact that we've had it will have an improvement or an increase availability of being able to buffer compared with if we didn't have it. So there is that increase, and we don't see a drop below. Like if I share again that slide, sorry, I trying to find the right screen is a bit of a challenge here, but essentially, it's in our situation, it's not like we are doing multiple hard efforts in a short period of time, and then there's a rebound impact here. So what we're seeing with this data is that where the peak is, but in our situation, in our sport, we're then looking to execute on the most part a single effort. And then if we're in a championship or something where there are multiple rounds, we're then able to adjust if there are multiple rounds in the same day. That's something for us to explore, and you can do a double dose, as in a second dose later in the day, particularly if there's 5 hours plus between the two rounds. If there's not, then we need to be really, really looking to work with the Athletics Canada support sports science team around like how that looks for that individual athlete. But there are situations in which you can have multiple doses in a single day. It would just need to be planned out, trialed out. And once again, there's a piece here that it's a great supplement, but even going on a lower end, a lower dosage of like optimal or what some of the research suggests, even if you're at, say, zero point 0.2 grams per kilo, there's going to be an elevation and an ability to buffer that out, like to be able to create some buffering impact that's beneficial for performance and going to help protect the muscle being able to essentially continue to contract at the intensity that we want it to. So we want to be able to dial in and optimize, but the reality is we're better off being conservative and then building out that plan. And as our tolerance increases, a component that I haven't really spoken to here, and you may well have been going to ask me, is that we're talking about GI distress, but GI distress can come from not just our event and running or competing or supplementation, but it can also come related to stress and anxiety. And so that's something that is important to trial out, most certainly before like a major championships, is that in a training environment at home with our teammates and our coach in a very controlled, familiar environment is really different to being on a world stage and doing it in a championship final. And so how those pieces are going to be individual to the athlete. And so us figuring what that is, that's going to look like, and trialing those pieces are really important.
Right. Yeah, that's obviously one of the things we talk about a lot on our side is, don't just show up at a championship and do all these crazy things. So yeah, in the trialing, you kind of sparked with, there was a slide I think I saw on your deck too, but you can maybe just speak to it of like when, bicarb is sort of the again, not a Maurten's thing. It just seems that everybody's using this. But when would it not be the right thing to do? When is it not the right solution? Or is there certain things, certain people, certain populations that may not be sort of the best situation for?
Yeah, for sure. So where it might not be the best situation would be people with existing GI issues, and I suppose like highly related to what we were just speaking about there around if this is somebody who experiences high anxiety in more stressful environments, then probably not necessarily the most appropriate situation, and there we would need to build out a bigger strategy. If general nutrition isn't dialed in first, I think that's really important. As I mentioned, carbohydrate is a pretty significant component into reducing down the GI distress, and so Maurten does allow us to maybe accelerate or expedite some of that, but it is important that we have a foundation of good fueling, good nutrition on it. And the other really big thing is that it needs to be trialed, and not doing it in that, as you mentioned, that championship environment, is not knowing how you're going to respond to it is a really big piece. So yeah, layering that on in training, and then probably like is a conjunctive here, but there is a component around it. Hydrogen ions do impact and influence pain receptors, and so as we're moving hydrogen ions around and we're drawing more hydrogen ions out of the muscle cell into the bloodstream, there's going to be an impact. And this is highly hypothesized. It's not actually been like necessarily like thoroughly investigated and shown, but we do know that they are some pain receptors are sensitive to hydrogen ions. So as we get this change, it's very, very likely, and most athletes that I've spoken to that have used bicarb have noted that there's a difference in how they feel in certain workouts, certain sessions, and then in a race. And so if we're getting different feelings and if it is impacting on pain receptors, then our feedback mechanisms of like what intensity is and how much we still have in the tank and what we can still work with in terms of race strategy and effort in within a race, regardless of the race length, is a really important part. And so if we're changing what that feels like, we need to recalibrate what that feels like. So using it in training not only is important for trialing, but certainly in terms of recalibrating our feelings. And as I say that, it's probably a pretty good point to say that just because something's helpful for one thing doesn't mean it's the best option when it comes to the biggest race of the season. And we may want to have a slightly more granular feel on our intrinsic receptors. So it could be that, okay, we use bicarb through rounds and it helps us to be able to go through rounds without necessarily having as much fatigue associated with it because we're buffering out better. But then it could be that for a given athlete, when it comes to a final, we may choose not to have it because there might be increased should we say increased like stress related to the fact that there's like it's the final, but there may also be a very real world consideration of I actually want to feel what it's going to feel like because in my natural body, because I want those signals, because I'm so in tune with those normal signals that in the final, I want to be able to make the judgment of where to make my moves based on having clean information of how I'm feeling. And I know there's an athlete within our system that made that kind of decision at a World Championships this year, and it was successful. So just because you do use it in training and you have been using it doesn't mean that you have to use it when it comes to a championship final.
Right. Oh, nice. Yeah. So there's questions coming in. I just have two questions maybe before we get to that. And then one was in sort of like, it seems like obviously almost not a necessity, but it seems like everybody is kind of doing it. Not that because everybody's doing it, you have to do it, but there is benefits that you've stated. Would you put an age limit up or down on the use, or how does it affect in that way, and also in like males and females? Does it affect differently, or is it kind of the same across the board?
Really great questions. I think like from my perspective, the first question is probably answered by my philosophy on supplements, and I know this is in line with the sports science team, is that it's built on good foundations, and those foundations being built first. So like it's underpinned by good training and good preparation, and it shouldn't be using a supplement shouldn't be a shortcut to being able to get to a point, get from A to B. So once we're at a particular level where we feel like we've kind of exposed ourselves to enough of the training program that we want to, I personally would say that there's also this piece that yes, we want to be able to train on it, but you don't want to train on it all the time because then like we're also negating some of the fundamental ways in which we can get muscle adaptation through some signaling pathways. So using it sparingly and then introducing it, I would say around probably the 17, 18 age range and beyond there. But that's just like my personal opinion. And then from a gender perspective, I haven't currently seen any research that has really like split out the genders. We're talking about physiology that's present in both genders, in person. And it's not something that is being seen within like the companies and the products that we're talking about or are out there around bicarb. So it's a great question, and I think further investigations needed to kind of ascertain that and like the impacts. But I think the impacts and how dramatic those impacts improvements can be is very much on an individual basis, regardless of gender.
Right. Nice. Yeah, thanks. I'm sure all of that research is already being currently conducted as we speak. So, so I'll go to the audience questions. There's a few in here now. The first one is, have you ever heard of Nomio? The broccoli and sprout extract, lemon, sugar. Apparently Cole Hawker and Connor Mance use it. It is a natural, ready-to-drink, performance-enhancing shot made primarily from concentrated organic broccoli sprouts designed to reduce lactate buildup and accelerate recovery for endurance athletes. Athletes report that Nomio, a natural shot made from broccoli sprouts and lemon, help them recover faster, train at a higher quality, and reduce lactate buildup during intense sessions and races. It's water compliant product, making it safe for use in professional competition. Long story short, have you heard of Nomio?
Yes, I have. It's a
Okay.
really good question, and is certainly growing in some traction. My Yeah, we've had some discourse within the sports science department of Athletics Canada, and where we're at with it is that some of the broccoli component has a very similar breakdown to beetroot juice and nitrates, and so that's been shown also to have improvements, particularly in the aerobic and endurance athlete spectrum. Nomio, from my reading and understanding, and then initial reach out to Nomio, is that primarily related to like lower intensity on that aerobic end, so more around the threshold type spectrum, and therefore probably more conducive around the training rather than necessarily the competition or racing situation. Now, that's just my early throes of understanding, and I think what would be great would be to take that question offline and for us to do a bit of a deeper dive and kind of come up to a like essentially some form of like level of understanding consensus of like where we see Nomio, similar to as we're talking about like bicarb right now, and have a bit of a discussion about it. And if anybody wants to kind of contact in, yeah, Nomio next year, that sounds great. And yeah, if anybody wants to reach out and like have some direct discourse on that and discussion, then about that product, then I think yeah, we'd really welcome that.
Awesome. Thanks. All right, next question. You briefly mentioned the multiple rounds. How would you address multiple rounds and using this?
So the way to address that would be to really look at what the time frame of that looks like. So looking at the scheduling component, and then working, drop me a line and we can kind of work through that. But on a very practical level in this moment in time, looking at the scheduling, and then depending on how close those events are and what product you're looking at. So if it is a Maurten, then there might be less of a need to do a redose within a specific period of time. So as I said earlier, multiple rounds, like if you have a 5+ hour gap, then a redose has shown to be like effective. Whereas if it's lower, like less time than that, then at this point in time, like our consensus would be to not do a double dose, and not do a redose between the rounds. But if you have 2 rounds in a single day where it's like 5 hours or more, then being able to do another dose is applicable. We can also play around with actually the amount of the dosage. So coming back to a dosage being typically between 0.2 and 0.3, with 0.3 being the higher zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.3 grams per kilo. If you're doing a double dose, we could sit on the lower end of that. And so it's not as aggressive, excuse me, to do a double dose. So that might be one way to play around with it. And then for sure, another piece would be to trial it in training and trial it multiple times in training. But the big piece being looking at that scheduling and yeah, if anybody has like specific questions on like how that could look, then yeah, please feel free to send an email and I can get back to you on it. But yeah, it's something I've had experience with, and I've had experience of actually doing a double dose within one competition schedule within a different sport, and there being 3 hours between, but it was a seated sport. So there are a few differences going on there. But the Maurten product is one that could be very attuned and like successful in that situation because of all the things that we've spoken around its delivery components.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking now like if an athlete is like multiple rounds plus you got to do other, or they're doubling up into other events, and you know how many.
And so like where that's probably the most prevalent is probably in our 400-meter space, probably in terms of like multiple rounds on the same day. And there might be a situation where you prioritize one or the other. And as I mentioned earlier, around you there could be a strategy where you use it through rounds to help with a recovery component or help with like buffering within that round and actually being able to buffer at a higher rate, so then you're able to recover better off the back end of it, and then potentially you don't use it for the final is another strategy that you could use.
Okay, nice. Okay. So you mentioned taking bicarbonate should be taken 90 minutes to 2 hours before the activity would be most optimal. But if you're taking Maurten, it would take longer to digest. Does that mean it should be taken roughly 3 hours before?
No, so that's my mistake for yeah,
Okay.
maybe um misreading that or communicating that. So it's not that it takes longer to digest. It's the fact that I think it's to do with its delivery and the fact that more of close to 100% of the bicarb that is ingested is actually making it through to the bloodstream. So um, essentially, it is the data is showing that its peak is sustained for a longer period of time. So basically, if you wanted to back it up in terms of back the timeline up, then you could. But it's like a pretty solid plateau. So once it hits its peak, which is around like 90 minutes, then it's pretty plateaued out for around the 4 hour mark. So you have that time to play with at its peak. And as I say, then it is plateaued pretty much, is what the data is showing. So yeah, you don't have to back up Maurten, and the 90 minutes to 2 hours is traditionally what we've seen with like across all of the studies, and is where I would start at, and then adjust from there to start at 90 minutes to 2 hours. And if the athlete experiences more GI distress, then you could back that up a little bit more. The other component being is I'd really start at a low dosage and then move from there as you go. And another consideration that we haven't mentioned is like what you're eating directly before or around consumption of bicarb, and that might be the last meal that you have as well. That the more acidity that's in the system probably going to create a more tricky environment for the stomach.
That's like our grade 8 science volcano experiment. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes, yes. Yeah.
nice.
So maybe choose certain food groups carefully.
Right. Yeah, I think there was a pineapple incident somewhere. Um, that is all for the audience questions. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we shut it down?
Um, no, I think we've covered all of the key things there. We've had some really good dialogue and conversation. Probably the final thing, just on like the logistics of Maurten, if Maurten was the product of choice, things to just consider with Maurten would be that um, if you are traveling, if the athlete is traveling for a period of time, making sure that they have all of the products they need for that travel period would be a good idea, and probably a few extra servings. And being aware that there is like a use by or a best by a date component to it, but also that there there has been and there are times in the year where they experience higher influx of orders, and there are then delays. So getting ahead of that component is important. We had like a number of occasions in this year where athletes were really they weren't able to get the product, and therefore what impact that has on their preparation, how they feel about going into their races. So being planned is important, and then the other component being that it unfortunately it is an expensive product. It's not a cheap one to go for. So yeah, having a good plan around when to use it is probably a good thing.
Okay. Do you have a question just came in here. I have seen athletes gagging on the gel. I personally have seen athletes gagging on the gel as well. Is there any way to help with that?
Um, yes, so I do appreciate that. Essentially, the hydrogel technology, we'll keep calling it that because that's what Maurten call it, but essentially the hydrogel is is a difficult sensation, and then you have these pellets in there as well. So it's definitely a strange situation. In answer to the question, like the piece is like familiarity, and like is normally the way that has typically worked, certainly with their other products, with the carb gel, and people becoming used to it. Is definitely something that some people are going to struggle with more than others, depending on like textures. And so outside of that, the only other thing that we really are going to be talking about is like adding or changing the consistency in some way, which will impact on like the delivery component. So if it doesn't sit with that individual, and after having a number of attempts doing that to get used to it, they're still gagging and not enjoying it, then my opinion would be that it potentially isn't the right product for that athlete. Now, yeah, I think leaving it there, because like to go into any pieces that adjust anything and add anything to that solution, it is going to be impacting the effectiveness of it. That we might be running into. Could we just look at a different solution anyway? So like there are other solutions such as we can get capsule pills that have like film on them that help protect them from like essentially getting through the stomach and the stomach acid and getting into the intestine anyway. So like there are other things that we can explore if people have been experiencing those issues. So yeah, once again, feel free to reach out and we
Right.
can kind of direct you.
So don't add water or Mio packets or flavorings to it to make it taste better just in case. Got it. Um, okay, can you maybe put your information up so
Yeah, sure.
that's possible so people know maybe how to get a hold of you if they need?
Yeah.
We'll leave that up for a second.
There you go. Oh, where's it gone there? That one there. It's that one there. Go on there.
Okay, perfect. Um, so if that is everything. No last second questions coming in. Um, Thanks again, Ollie. This is a topic that is, again, was kind of that hot topic. So hopefully there's some information that is useful to the people that are on here. And hopefully some of you will see some of you next week and the following week for the two other series. And if that's all, hope everyone has a great night.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. I appreciate it. And yeah, please feel free to reach out with any questions.